Welcome to Excel Radio with Dr. Nick Zyrowski, where we talk with world-class entrepreneurs, executives, and health experts who have unlocked the secrets to Excel health and performance.
Hi, and welcome to Excel Radio. This is your host and high-performance expert, Dr. Nick Zyrowski. In this episode, we have brought back Louise Hendon through popular demand. Now, if you don't remember Jeremy, he is very well known, both him and his wife, in the Paleo space. So they're both Paleo bloggers. They are the former owners of Paleo magazine, and him and his wife together have written several books. In our last episode, Jeremy and I had spoken on many topics, anywhere from lab testing to just living a paleo lifestyle, and he brought a lot of value to the listener. So we brought him back, and he once again delivers value just like last time. Hope you enjoy the show. Hey, Jeremy, thanks for being on the show with us today. How you doing?
Yeah. I'm doing excellent. Thanks so much for having me back.
So could you reintroduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I forget how I introduced myself last time. I think most people probably know me from having founded a couple health magazines, Paleo Living and Healthy Recipes, which we don't own anymore. But then my wife mostly still runs paleomagazine.com, which we founded and have grown. And other than that, I do a variety of things. I've written a few books. I actually have a podcast, although I haven't updated it in a bit, but I'm starting it back, and just a few other things that I have going. So we can talk about all of it or any of it.
Awesome. So right now you're actually, where are you living at?
I am living in Lisbon, Portugal.
Okay. And what brings you out there? Just travel, or is it family?
No family. So my wife grew up in England, although her family's all in the U.S. or in China now. My family's all in Georgia. We were living in Asia for the winter because it was warm and nice, and we decided we wanted to come to Europe in May. And so we looked around, and the main place we were thinking about going, which was Budapest, because one of my best friends is Hungarian, and I've been to Budapest and love it. But in May, it was still a little bit cold and a little bit too wet. And so we thought, well, let's try Lisbon. And we got here, and now we're going to stay for a little bit because Lisbon's kind of fantastic.
That's awesome. Awesome. So I don't know if everybody remembers, but Jeremy's been on the show before, and he delivered some great value, and we just talked. I mean, when we get talking, we talk about a little bit of everything, but one of the topics we're going to talk a little bit about today is stress and, managing stress. And so, Jeremy, could you take this topic of stress and let's kind of dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought about it again because I was interviewing Tom O'Brien yesterday for an event that we have coming up in September. And a lot of your listeners might know Tom O'Brien. He's very much into food sensitivities and autoimmune issues, and just an all-around great guy. And we actually got to talking about stress, and and then I knew this interview was coming up today, and I thought, well, let's talk a little more about it, because it's been something that I've actually been fascinated with for the past year or two. I remember when Mark Sisson came out with his book, The Primal Connection, talking a lot about communities and our evolutionary need for communities, and also how these things are affecting us. And it's been one of the things that's been driving me, because I hang out with a lot of entrepreneurs, and before this I was a lawyer, so I was hanging out with a lot of lawyers and bankers, particularly in New York City. And the stress piece, it's so fascinating. One of the stories that Dr. Tom O'Brien told me yesterday that I actually didn't know. I had actually never looked up the etymology of stress or how we think about it right now, but there was a Hungarian named Celje who essentially coined the word stress. I think it was in the 30s for how we think about stress now and what it does to our body's stressors. And what he was doing was he was actually feeding various desiccated organs to mice, and he would see various adverse reactions on their bodies. And he thought he had found a new hormone that was kind of across a lot of these organs. But then he realized that if you just fed them a bunch of different random things that they weren't supposed to be eating, that he would see the same reactions. And so he started, he coined this word stress for what was happening to their bodies. And so, often now in 2016, right now when we're recording this, we think of stress, we think of this psychological stress, right? Stress is really this whole thing that happens to our bodies. Food is a big stressor, particularly if you're eating processed foods or foods that just don't work well with our bodies. There are all sorts of toxins and basic toxicologies. Everything's a toxin depending on the dosage, but some in more quickly than others, right? Lead, arsenic, those types of things, all sorts of things around us, electromagnetic fields. But then there are also these stressors of, for instance, not living in a tight-knit community, which it's one of the few podcasts I still listen to is Tim Ferriss's podcast, and he had Sebastian Junger, who is a 3 or 4 time New York Times bestselling author. And one of the books that he wrote was on war. And one of the things he's particularly interested in is post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the stats that he gives is that 10% of our military see active duty combat right now, or around 10%, but about 50% come back or leave the military with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
And, there's still a lot of dispute over why this is, and I'm definitely no PTSD expert, but one of his conjectures, which really resonates with me from all the research I've done and from everything I know about my own life and from a lot of other places, is that the reason that the PTSD is so much higher is because these people are coming out of this very, very close-knit, tight, bonded group, right? In a platoon, you're usually with like 40 to 50 other people, which is even smaller than Dunbar's number traditionally, which we evolutionary grew up with like 140, 145. And they're coming out of this very tight-knit group, and they come back to a very alienating society where even if you have a family, you don't have a tight-knit community around you. You're not living in close proximity. And he says that if you look at the Peace Corps, what's really interesting is a very high percentage number of people who come back from Peace Corps get post-traumatic stress disorder. And he said it's often because they've gone to places, essentially lesser developed countries, where they're living, often sleeping next to 10, 12, or 15 other people in very tight proximity, living with them all the time with that close-knit community. And so that's a huge stressor on us too, right? Having this alienating and very individualized sense of community, which I see a lot in the U.S., I see a lot in certain other countries, and less so in others. So that's part of why it fascinates me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's all too often you live in a community where your neighbor doesn't talk to you, and you say hi to them, and they kind of look at you like, why are you talking to me? And it's kind of a strange thing. I don't understand. I can't tell you how often I'm walking down a sidewalk or something, and I tell somebody, good morning, and they just look away or something, and I'm like, I don't understand it.
There have been studies, if you're homeless for more than about 48 hours, it can have semi-permanent effects on your brain just because you get so ignored as soon as you're homeless and you feel so disconnected from humanity all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So what you're saying basically is that basically from a primal connection standpoint, that in a stress standpoint, it is really imperative for us to surround ourselves with groups of other individuals and live in community versus just alienating ourselves.
Yeah, so there has been a variety of work and studies done on this. I don't think it's one of these things that's really, really hard to isolate. In fact, there's so many studies out there that people love pointing to that say that we should ingest 1 or 2 glasses of wine a day. It's very healthy, right? I actually think all those studies are super biased because the places where people do that on average are places where they have very tight-knit communities. And the reason that they're having 1 to 2 glasses of wine per day is because they're often going out with their friends or going out into their community and hanging out. I feel like there's a super strong effect of that social aspect. But yeah, I do. I just don't think, and this is what's so interesting to me, I don't think we found a way to recreate it yet, right? I think starting with the agricultural revolution, it distanced us a little because we started living a little bit more independently, on farms, in family units, rather than with a nomadic tribe. I think the Industrial Revolution shot that through the roof. We started living in cities where we have more people around, but we feel more alienated than ever because we don't know all of these people and we're not tight with a small group of them. And then I think now with digital technology, it's taking it to an even, another level altogether. And I don't think we've found an answer yet. And maybe technology will find an answer. I'm actually a big tech fan, so I don't put it past technology at all. But I don't think we've seen it yet. And I think it's a huge problem, the community piece and the stress piece.
Okay, absolutely. And so one of the things you were talking about too is, so we're looking at these different aspects of stress. So we're talking about the community piece, but then we also talked about the stressors from in more of the physical stressors rather than the mental stressors, the toxins and bad food and all those things. Now, let's say somebody who's suffering from health concerns that are related to stress. Let's say high blood pressure and it can really go on and on and on, the health concerns that are coming from stress. And so these same people that are stressed out of their minds with all these health concerns, like, is it really the physical piece or the emotional piece, or is it really both that they have to really come to grips with in order to really overcome that illness, you think?
I feel like that's a softball question.
Yeah.
I feel like we agree on that. I feel like most people would. I think we all know it's everything, right? I don't think we can really separate them. I think some people lean towards saying it's more of the emotional and psychological piece. Some people lean a lot more towards saying it's the physical piece, and we figure all of that out. Ironically, I feel like I lean a little more towards the physical piece. And when I say physical, I actually mean that if we do so many things physically, right, like eat the right foods and avoid certain toxins that are very prevalent both in our diet and in our environment, and if we surround ourselves physically with a tight-knit community, right? So I actually lean a little more towards the physical side and feel like I almost feel like that's just the more practical side to deal with. And I feel like once people are able to deal with that side of it because it's concrete and it sort of makes sense, that the other pieces of it come more easily, right? Like it's a little easier. For instance, when we've helped put thousands or tens of thousands of people on paleo or keto diets, right? And often it's to lose weight or something. But time and again, when they get on those diets, all of a sudden, like, oh my God, I have more energy. I can think a little bit clearer, right? Because they're eating unprocessed foods. They're just living a generally healthier life. And all of a sudden, it becomes easier for them to make other changes. And, there are a lot of people who've talked about things like domino habits or the domino effect of certain changes that you can make in your life. And I feel like going from the physical to the emotional side or to the psychological side is the easier way to go because it does give you more of that mental clarity, more of the energy. So I feel like, the easiest place to start is often just to start feeding yourself the right foods. Take out all the processed sugar, take out the seed oils, take out most of the grains, since most people have, well, everybody has an adverse reaction to gluten. We know that. But since most people have an adverse reaction to most grains, take out those things and start feeling better and then be able to make those other changes.
Right. And I have to agree with you. I really think it's both. And I deal with more of the biological side of the whole thing and removing the toxins. And, I deal with more of the people who are stuck and they can't get out of that, like no matter what they do. That's more of the people that I'm working with. But I really, I think it's both. That's even when I work with people, if I realize stress is a big part of their life, like, I'm fully aware that there is a limitation to getting them well if they're working a job that is 80 hours a week and they're not willing to put any effort into their health. There's so many different things, but like I said, the one thing that I am fully aware of is if somebody's just stressed to the max, like we can biologically change their body. However, like you have to deal with that stress, that emotional piece.
I think you and I know that the stress piece is one of the hardest. Like, I don't know exactly how many hours you work, but I don't think it's 10 or 15 a week.
No. and it is.
It's hard. It's hard to relax enough.
Yeah, I think it is hard, and I really think that just for anybody anymore, it can become something that spirals out of control. Let's face it. So, like, if you look at, the average American's life, they're trying to raise a family, they're trying to make a living, they're trying to, there's the technology that is all around them. They're trying to catch up on all their Netflix. Yeah, there's just there's so much stuff going on. There's so much noise, right. And I just think that it really it turns into one of those things that people don't know how to control it anymore, and so that's why. like I'll oftentimes just get people to step back and take that time for themselves and take that time to meditate and take that time to journal and do these things and just kind of create inner peace.
Yeah, which is, that's actually the piece of it I'm most fascinated in. It's funny because I say I come at more from the physical side because I do see people make more progress there to begin with, but the piece that really fascinates me. So for the past couple of years, I've also been very interested in play. There's a few people I won't name them, but who've been very instrumental in talking about play over the past century. A couple of researchers, and it's funny when I go back and I read a lot of spiritual texts, whether they're Christian or the Bhagavad Gita or the Tao Te Ching or anything else. What always comes out is a certain playfulness. And also, if you see monks who've been monks for a long time, or I was lucky when I was in college, the Dalai Lama actually came and spent most of a semester at Emory. When you see these people who we think of as more enlightened, like more present, they do have this childlike, playful quality. And I feel like as much as it is relaxing for us and what we call de-stressing, it's also just approaching everything we do with what I call a lightness. And I use lightness because that word doesn't carry as much baggage as a lot of other words. But I think it's approaching things without the level of seriousness. We approach everything so seriously. And I don't know if you've read it, The World Until Yesterday, written by the same guy, Jared Diamond. Sorry, I was blanking on his name for a moment. Written by Jared Diamond, who most people know Guns, Germs, and Steel, won the Pulitzer, I think, back in the mid to late 90s. He's also written a bunch of other books. He was an anthropologist for a long time, mostly in Papua New Guinea, but he studied cultures and civilizations around the world, often semi-prehistorical cultures, right? Cultures that were to some degree nomadic and isolated well into the mid to late 20th century. And I don't know how many years he spent down there, but it's got somewhere between like 30 and 40, I think. And so World Until Yesterday, one of the things he talks about is people think that, pre-agricultural life, which is human life for about 2.5 million years, they think this human life was like really serious, that you're always talking about serious things or doing serious hunting or whatever. He says literally most of the time that people in these tribes spent sitting around talking about literally nothing. He says, for example, in one tribe in Papua New Guinea, I forget the stat that he gives, but something like half their time was spent talking about how many bananas they ate the day before. not to judge like how many bananas they had left for any reason, but just because you're like, oh yeah, I ate 15 bananas yesterday, or whatever it was.
Right.
And that's just what they do. And it's interesting that we were talking about community too, because if you look historically, the reason people always think gossip is such a bad thing, we're always gossiping about celebrities or about our neighbors and things, and gossip is 1,000,000 times faster at establishing both a hierarchy and social cohesion so that we know what's going on with every member of our tribe. And the reason you want to have that is because in a tribe of 130, 150 people, you need to not only know everybody, but you need to know everything that's going on, because everything that's going on affects you and affects your livelihood, right? You need to be a part of that group, and that group is your survival. And so gossip actually served that function. So it's really fascinating when we think about how we spend our time now. We think it has to be so serious. We think it has to be so goal-oriented that we always have to be getting these things done. We have to be, progressing in our life, and I mean this in every way. Even for people who, talk in a slightly more enlightened way these days, we're always like, oh yeah, we need to grow. We need to become a better person. We need to become our best self, right? It's all the same for me. Like I'm actually I don't want to say averse to that way of thinking, because I think it's all fine, but it's always fascinating to me that we're always aiming towards that. We always feel like we need to improve ourselves. We need to be better in some way. We need to grow in some way. Even Tony Robbins says it's like, growing is living, which I don't particularly agree with. I agree with it if you're stuck in this dichotomy of needing to always be better, but I think to the degree that we can let go of that piece, that it helps us on both the psychological level and comes back to that really the physical level, and really helps us because it releases a weight of always needing to be better, of always needing to grow and needing to find out how good we can become.
Yeah, and from like an entrepreneurial perspective, I can't tell you, like when I look at like my people that I'm friends with on Facebook, I mean, like it's like 95% like entrepreneurs, some very successful, some climb in the ranks, and it's like, and it's kind of funny because they always post all their stuff, and obviously as well as I do, one of the big hot topics has been morning routines and what your morning routine is, and like in another thing, and I think this is probably because of Ty Lopez posting all of the pictures about books all over the internet, and he like literally broke the internet with his YouTube videos. But like, people putting stacks of books that are like 20 books tall, like I'm gonna crush all these books over this month, and it's like, people just like turn themselves into these machines, right? Like, and they're just, if they're not doing, they feel like they're not accomplishing. And like, I mean, for me, I've done the morning routine stuff. I think it's a good way to get yourself back on track if you're really falling off the bandwagon in these rigid schedules. But like living day in and day out with like this rigid schedule, like, I mean, it's not human, and it really just will burn you right out.
Let me ask you this. How does it make you feel to see 95% entrepreneurs on your feed posting everything that they're doing?
Like, I'm just like, good for you. I don't really care. Like, I'm not the type of guy who's like, I got to be like him. I just got to be like myself, and I'm the what you see is what you get kind of guy. But I find it interesting. I kind of always take a step back and just analyze it and be like, wow, okay, good, that's awesome. He's like, really trying to step up his game and stuff. But honestly, I feel like a lot of people, their best foot forward is on the internet, and then what happens behind the scenes, who really knows?
Right. Well, so I actually stopped. So I remember about 3 years ago, I culled my Facebook feed. And I had only people that I sort of admired, who I felt were doing really cool stuff. This was 3 or 4 years ago. And so on my Facebook feed, when I would get on there, I would see people doing really cool stuff and great stuff too. I mean, they were helping people, things that people would generally consider very, very good things. They weren't just boasting about, I made $1 million or whatever. I mean, they were like, really helped this person with their emotional issues or whatever. I mean, and the thing I found is that it was stressing me out, and it wasn't an obvious stress for me. It wasn't like I saw it and I thought, oh my God, I need to be doing that, or I need to be better than them. But I realized that it was sort of this subconscious stress for me, because even just seeing all of that and seeing people doing it, I felt like I needed to be doing more all the time. Like I needed to be accomplishing a little more. And a lot of people say this is a good thing. Like, I surround myself with all these people who are doing so much more so that it motivates me, which is funny, because I'm like, well, why do you need to be motivated? Why do you need to be pushed in that way? But that's the only reason I asked. It's because I personally found I actually don't look at Facebook anymore. I don't have it on actually I have one of the apps on my computer that I go on Facebook because I run a couple groups and I use it for Messenger, but I have one of the plugins where I can't see the feed. It automatically removes the feed. I'm sure Facebook loves that, but
Right. Yeah, and no, I'm the same way. I mean, except for like business purposes, I can't say I spend a lot of time on there seeing what's being posted. But like I said, it's one of the things, and this is good for the listeners to realize too, because this is the realization I've come across, is that one of the things is that a lot of these people, like I said, they're putting their best foot forward. And I mean, whether it's them, talking about their business, and like they're not putting their struggles on the internet. They're just putting like how they're rock stars and that they're crushing it. And the reality of a lot of these people's lives aren't what you think it is. And so that's why, like, if you're the type of person who sees this stuff and it stresses you out, like, oh my gosh, I need to do more, I need to catch up with this person, just be aware that there's a good chance you're kind of seeing like a distorted reality of that individual's life. And that's the way I see it.
I'll give you a quick example. So obviously we've been in the paleo world for quite a while, and we've been, we know a lot of the paleo bloggers. Back in the day, a few years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we'd go to the, like the Ancestral Health Symposium, Paleo FX, some of those things where a lot of them would show up. And if you think that paleo bloggers eat perfectly, I was actually shocked, because Louise and I, especially when we're in the United States, we probably eat better than 99% of paleo bloggers. There are some vast exceptions. Like Mark Sisson, man, the guy is like, he's like perfect. Like the guy, I'm so impressed with that guy every time I meet him and see him. Like, and Rob Wolf. I mean, there are a lot of them, but you know, there are also a lot of the ones that you see online. It's just one example of what you're talking about, like putting your best foot forward, showing you all the best recipes and everything, and then going out for ice cream afterwards, or like whatever it is. You know, it happens all the time.
No, I feel like that's the case. And, you know, that's why even like, you know, when I put my stuff out, like I don't take I would say like, I don't know, the path of, oh, well, I'm perfect and I do this with my health and I do that with my health, because I feel like when you follow some of these people, they're always talking about, you know, the newest supplement they're taking and the newest lab tests they're running, and you're just like, man, how are they doing all this? Like, you know, because they just said last week that they were taking this supplement, and if you add up all the supplements they're taking like 30 different supplements, and of course they're not doing that. They're like, you know, this one particular week they got on this like little, you know, thing with this supplement, and they just started taking it. But like their readers are just thinking that they're like superhuman, and they're exercising like a bandit, taking 1 million supplements, you know, and it's like it's just a distorted reality. Yeah,
there are a few people who walk this walk, and there are always people I'm really, like Ben Greenfield, for instance. Man, like I don't know Ben that well. I've only met him a few times, but that guy. He really, like, he does everything he says and more. He's not even like, he doesn't even put everything he does on there, and he's like, I've met him and his brother. They're like two of the most grounded, realistic people you ever meet. It's kind of crazy.
Oh yeah, and they're hilarious.
I joked with his brother. I'm like, man, I want to meet your parents. Like, how did your parents raise you guys? Like, but they're both like Adonis, first of all. Like, I don't even know how they look, how they do, but yeah, they're both like that. Yeah, perfect. But then they're, you know, it's like the Dr. Oz effect, what you were mentioning. You know, there's no way you could do even a third of what Dr. Oz has on his show, right?
I know.
It's like,
I have like patients that come to me, and it's so funny because all I can do is like roll my eyes, because, you know, every time I see them, they're on like some new kick. And like, for instance, you know, one of the patients came in, they were drinking hot water. I'm like, what do you got there? Oh, just hot water. And I'm like, well, what are you drinking hot water for? Well, Dr. Oz, and all, like, goes on. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, stop it. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I've met Ben Greenfield probably at some of the same events you've met him, and he's like definitely he's a machine, man. He literally does like I don't know, maybe like 10 plus Spartan races a year, probably more.
Right. Yeah, he's kind of insane. I mean, insane in a good way, but man, he just go like perfect physical condition. It's kind of crazy. He did some tests with my friend Chris Kelly, and Chris has been on Ben's podcast a couple times, and I did this lab test recently. It's been around for a while. It's not a particularly new thing, and my friend Chris didn't come up with it. He just uses it now. But it's called the Dutch test. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dutch test.
Yeah, a little bit.
Ben took it right before I did, and Ben's like, he's like, it was really interesting. He's like, there was some actual stuff in there. He's like, I produce hormones like like a gorilla. He's like just producing everything across the board. And then I got mine back, and I don't look anything like Ben, by the way. And I got mine back, and I was like, man, like I produce so many hormones, like my testosterone levels, my cortisol levels, everything's through the roof. And when I've tested before on some of the adrenal panels, the salivary ones, I come back either low or low to mid, which is something I'd worked on in the past, and actually gotten my DHEA levels up. I'd gotten my cortisol levels up and back in rhythm, although they'd always still been just kind of in the middle at best and not near the top of the range. And so, for a long time, I think starting back around like 2010, 2011, I thought I had adrenal fatigue.
Right.
And I did to some degree, whatever we call adrenal fatigue, adrenal depletion, right? I mean, there's all these names for it now. I admit adrenal fatigue is probably a bad name, because it's not really that our adrenal glands get worn out for the most part. It's more of the HPA axis and the signaling and everything. But nonetheless, right, those cortisol panels, they only show you a little bit. They only show you essentially some of the metabolites. But then when you do this dried urine panel, the Dutch test, I forget exactly what it stands for, but dried urine something hormones, it shows you so much. And in fact, a lot of people who are low on the salivary cortisol panel are actually producing a ton, but it's getting shifted down different pathways. And so it's not ending up as the cortisol that we think of, as the free cortisol that actually doesn't give us energy, but keeps us awake and keeps us alert and gives us that feeling of energy. And so it was really fascinating for me, because now I've kind of shifted directions and been trying to figure out, well, why is it that I'm producing so much, and maybe even a little too much? Because you look at my testosterone numbers. Actually, my hair's starting to thin just a little now, and I'm 30. How old am I? 37. Yeah, I'm 37. I had to think about that. I'm 37 now. My hair's starting to thin a little bit, but I look at this panel and I'm like, well, no wonder, because I've got so much dihydroxytestosterone, right? Which is one of the main reasons that you see mild pattern baldness, right? Is it starts getting stuck in your hair follicles, which causes it to thin, right? That's the main reason that we see male pattern baldness. I'm like, well, darn, like I could get my testosterone down just a little bit. Everybody else is like, oh yeah, I'd kill for testosterone that high. I'm like,
yeah,
well,
I know. Yeah, everybody's talking about their low T, and you're like, yeah, I'm a little bit high.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When I do lab testing, I'm always looking just for all aspects of cellular health, and some of these things and we have a lot of lab tests out there right now. Lab tests have really come a long ways, and we can figure out some really cool stuff. But it always comes back to, okay, so let's say you're producing these hormones, but however they're not really being utilized properly, and so I always go back to cellular health and how to the hormone signaling from cell to cell, and making sure that these hormones are being heard and not just being produced but not being utilized.
And what are your favorite tests for cellular health?
There's some different tests out there that test for inflammation. I like some of the tests that are just very simple tests that are checking for inflammation. So I like to look at that one. I like to look at nutrient testing in order to see where the nutrients are missing. And I think we actually talked about that last time. Did we talk? Which nutrient test do you use?
So I lean towards the pathway tests, like the urine organic acids. I don't like testing. I mean, I don't actually prescribe any of these tests myself. That's not something I do. So when I say I like them, I'll either talking about doing them for myself, or when I have people come to me or I'm coaching somebody and they want to do this, or I think they should, or whatever, I'll send them to Chris, who is my friend who does all of this, and is super, super smart. He's a complete geek at it. But I just theoretically, I lean towards the pathway tests like urine organic acids. I'm still producing some of the urine organic acids that show that my methylation cycle is not working properly. Right?
Yep.
And if that's the case, it doesn't matter if it looks like I have enough B12, because those urine organic acids are going to tell me if that methylation cycle is breaking down because I don't have enough B12, because it'll produce a particular urine organic acid. And so I lean towards that sort of tests, like from Genova, the organics, which is urine organic acid. Yep. There's also Dr. Dada runs it. Yep. There's some good labs. And so I sort of like those tests, and I call them pathway tests, because they're really looking at the pathway and telling you if something is not working, if a pathway is not working, rather than testing the nutrient directly, because that doesn't really tell us if it's a problem or not.
Right. No, I agree with that too. One of the tests too that I say that when you look at this test, whether you say, okay, well, does this give us solutions or does this give us answers? But really just to be able to identify what's going on, and it's the cardiometabolic test that we run quite often, and it's just because so many people, heart disease is a big problem right now for so many people, and so if we can run that test and identify the issue, 1 in 2 people dying of heart disease, and most people are getting their cholesterol checked still, which is ridiculous. and just being like, yeah, I'm completely healthy, I got a clean bill of health, but the fact is more people die of low cholesterol than high cholesterol. So go ahead.
I think that's one area where technology will very quickly start to make a difference over the next 10 to 15 years. And the reason being that, there are certain things that if you did every 6 to 12 months, like if you were doing a coronary plaque scan, right? Like a CT scan of your coronary plaque, That if you were doing that every 6 months, you'd be able to tell if you had atherosclerosis or if it was growing or what was going on, and that essentially that would be a gold standard, right? It wouldn't be a gold standard for all health, but it'd be a gold standard for cardiovascular disease to know whether or not you've got plaque building up and inflammation building up in your arteries. And the same thing for our brains, right? If we could scan our brains every 6 months and see what's happening, see if certain parts of them are becoming more or less active, see if certain parts of them are growing or shrinking, then that would also really, really be a gold standard for brain health in some ways. And I feel like technology will pretty quickly make that sort of testing a lot cheaper and more readily accessible on an individual basis. Or at least that's my hope. And I don't think.
And I really do feel that it will, because I mean, there's even testing that I have that it literally used to cost thousands of dollars, and now they've brought it down. I mean, they've brought some of it down like consumer level. I mean, let's just look at like heart rate variability, for instance. When that first came out, like you didn't go get heart rate variability for cheap. Like, I mean,
I test it on my iPhone every morning. I just use my camera because it's pretty much as accurate with a camera to test RMSSD as it is with a sensor on your chest.
Yeah, so like, I mean, just think about it though. Like, so here we are, I mean, anymore, and what app are you using?
HRV for training.
Okay, so let's say like that. Now, was it free?
I think it was $9.
$9. Okay, so you got a $9 app. And this is something that people didn't have access to without paying a ton of money, and even a healthcare practitioner like myself didn't have access to without spending like thousands and thousands of dollars. And now it's starting to be available at a consumer level for let's say like you have it for something for $9. So it's really interesting, and I think you're right. I think that a lot of these tests they will eventually become less and less expensive. It's just like, I think when the technology first comes out, they got to make their money off of it basically, and then eventually when they can have some competitors in that market, it's going to drive that the testing down, and also they're coming up with more creative ways to do it. I mean, obviously we couldn't have done it with an iPhone years ago. So.
Yeah, it's the tech that'll help. I mean, healthcare is one of the hardest things to solve. You know this as well as anybody, essentially being in the healthcare field. I mean, it's just one of those issues. Everybody talks about it as if they have all these solutions, like, oh, look at this country, they're doing okay, or this is really good about this country. Like, there's really no great solution, because you're right. Companies need to be able to make money off of these things, right? We don't need to be able to limit the amount of money they're making when some of this technology first comes out, because we need that money to drive innovation. We need it to drive R&D in so many ways. We talk about healthcare. It's one of those things that is really hard, because you need to have the money there to drive the innovation. And honestly, the U.S. has driven a lot of the innovation for the world. I mean, you talk about how good certain healthcare is around the world, but a lot of the tech came from the U.S. Not all of it, but I'm just saying the U.S. has driven a lot of that tech because we've had a market that was able to sustain and to fund that sort of tech. But then on the other hand, of course, we do need it to come down, reasonably quickly, and we do need to become accessible, because it is something that everybody needs. And obviously we're facing, everybody's saying that, this young generation, I think Generation Y is the first generation that will live less than its parents' generation.
Yeah.
Is what they're predicting. Or I don't know if it's Generation Y or maybe Z versus Y. But
it's interesting though, because one of the things too though is that, like I said, I just mentioned how, like, I can't tell you how many people are like, yeah, I'm healthy, I just got my cholesterol test. We have known for years that, like, that is not an indicator of heart health. Like, that is nonsense at this point, right?
Yeah.
There's so many other things, there's so many variables to look at. You got to look at the inflammatory markers in the heart, and the particle size, and all these different things in the heart. You can't just look at the cholesterol. And so we know that at this point. However, I mean, there's been books on it, but yet still, in mainstream hospitals and medicine, they are just running this same old cholesterol test. And so when I work with companies, and these big companies are, they have like they'll have some medical outfit come in and run lab tests on all their people. It's typically they're looking for cholesterol, and once again, it's so behind its time. So not only do we have the technology, but a lot of it's not being utilized properly. So we have it, but it's just not there. I mean, there's, some, like, let's say, for instance, like, your friend Chris Kelly, sounds like he's doing some cool stuff with testing. So he's running the right test. I'm running the right test, looking for real solutions for people. But, going to, mainstream medicine and going to a hospital and expecting to get these tests, or even expecting your insurance, to pay for some of these tests that offer better data, it's not there. Like, it's just not.
And honestly, it's better in the U.S. than anywhere else. Like, at least in the U.S., you can go find people like you who will run these tests. I've been traveling a lot over the past 3 years, and everywhere else in the world, it's practically impossible. There is practically, I mean, I don't want to say there's nobody, because that would be a disgrace to the people out in other countries that are doing it, and there are people, but there are so many fewer and further between than in the U.S. And like you said, in the U.S., obviously it's still not even close to mainstream. But yeah, you're right. There's so much tech there, whether it's testing, whether it's anything else, that it's just not getting used in the way it should. And also, I don't know if you know Brendan Bouchard, but one of the things he says that I like is that common sense is not always common practice. And, as much as we talk about testing and technology not being used the way it should, there's also just so much common sense that we know about health and well-being. We have known for 2,000 years the value of meditation. We've known at least that long the value of drinking enough water. And I'm not talking about overhydrating and washing away all your your minerals and everything. But there are these basic things that we've known for so long. And pretty much everybody you walk down the street and you ask somebody who's drinking a Coke and eating a donut. You say do you think vegetables would be healthier than that Coke and donut? And they'd be like, yeah, they know, right? Yeah. We all know. Nobody thinks the donut's healthy.
Right, so exactly.
There's so much that's common sense that's not common practice, particularly in health, but also in every other area of our life.
And you're making a really good point, because we talk about all the ways to fix healthcare. One of the biggest ways that we can fix healthcare is educate people on proper things that they can do for their health. Like you said, they know, but it needs to just be more available. Now, I know just from living in Atlanta, Georgia for such a long period of time, and then moving back to where I grew up in Michigan, like, oh my gosh, what a difference. Like, there down in Georgia, you can go to these different, there's restaurants all over that offer incredible, healthy food. You have grocery stores carrying health food, and then when you come, and let me just mention that the people there, you notice, are just healthier altogether. You're just walking down the street. I moved back to Michigan, and it's things that they've been doing down there for years are finally just starting to come up here, where grocery stores are carrying a good amount of health food, and now some restaurants are thinking they might want to start offering other things than fries and greasy burgers. So it's one of those things that people just have to start making better decisions. But better decisions have to be available, and that's how we're going to find a solution to healthcare, is by getting people to make better decisions every day. When I going to high school, and I know it's still like this, but all there was is vending machines full of garbage and pop machines, just
I
soda
remember
machines.
Eating all of that in high school. It was so good.
Yeah, I know, and so but if we can just imagine how much healthier kids could be if we just made at least it available to them. There's plenty of delicious health food out there. It's not like they're going to be buying a salad with carrots and cucumbers. It's there's better options.
You're absolutely right. So in the U.S., we've lived in very affluent areas, and we haven't lived in extremely poor areas because we've always been fairly lucky and have had some money, but we've lived in definitely poorer areas, and the contrast is very stark as to what's available. The poorer and less affluent the area is, the neighborhood is, the less you have fresh produce, the less you have good cuts of meat, and just generally unprocessed food. You just see a lot more processed food, and obviously just a ton more liquor stores. So much more in less affluent neighborhoods that's available, and makes it so much harder if you're living there to eat healthy and to make healthy choices, because you have fewer choices. You have a lot more temptation in terms of that's just the preponderance of what you see is very unhealthy food and not very much that's a good choice.
Right. Yeah, your environment does act on you, and so if you're around all just poor, unhealthy choices, essentially, eventually that's going to start creeping into your life unless you're, really on it and making sure it doesn't. But yeah, that's really, I think, how we solve a healthcare crisis is just by getting people to start taking care of themselves, and not just waiting. I mean, because right now it's just a sick care system where it's like, okay, well, once you think you have cancer, come in and see us, and we'll tell you have cancer. Or once you think you're dying of a heart problem, then come in and see us, and we'll tell you you're dying of a heart problem. But there's no coming in and learning about how to avoid heart problems, and it's just really like, let's identify the problem and then tell you have the problem and then give some type of medication for the problem.
Yeah. I think we need to incentivize it from the other direction too. I mean, there's some insurance companies that are starting to do this, which is starting to take doctors in-house and actually make the doctors themselves a fixed cost. Because once you make the doctors themselves a fixed cost, then your goal becomes to minimize the treatment that people need, which means that you start prioritizing preventative care because you've made everything else a fixed cost. And so if you can keep people healthy, then you don't have any of the other costs that you would eventually have to pay. So I think you can incentivize it that way. And we just need to think more about investing. I mean, so, one of the people that I like, and a lot of people know this, is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And if people haven't read his biography, Total Recall, which is a great name for a biography, obviously. But you read his autobiography. And so when I first started working in California, I was a lawyer. And one of the guys at my firm, Bob Hertzberg, he had been Speaker of the General Assembly, which is essentially like the Congress of California. And he had worked a little bit with Schwarzenegger both when he was in office. Bob Hertzberg was a lifelong Democrat. I would say lifelong. He was a Democrat. I think he'd been a Democrat for pretty much forever. And awesome guy, one of the best guys I ever met. But I remember him even talking about Schwarzenegger then. He said, he's like, and I'm going to misquote him, so don't attribute this directly to Bob. But the gist of what Bob said was that Schwarzenegger was actually fairly impressive to work with because he was very practical. He wanted to get things done. And if you read his biography, what Schwarzenegger says about himself is the way that he turned everything around, especially for Republicans, because he was a Republican, is that he talked more about investing in our future. Rather than spending money or taxing and spending, he was thinking about using money in ways that made sense. That as if you were running California as a business, investing that money. And I think us talking about healthcare, it makes a lot of sense too, because it makes sense on an individual level for people to invest both in energetic ways in their health right now, right, doing the right things, and also in financial ways, getting some of the tests earlier, even if they have to pay for them, so that it saves them money and pain and a lot of sickness down the road. But it makes sense on a societal level too, to invest both money, time, and energy now that will save us money, time, and energy in the future. I mean, and this is not just healthcare. I mean, if we were on a political podcast, we'd talk about things like preventing drug abuse or preventing people from, spending money on education so people are not going into the prison system, various things that we could talk about. But I think it's particularly apt when we think about healthcare and on a personal and societal level for people to think about actually investing that time and money so that we save it down the road, because it costs a lot more to have open heart surgery than it does to run a few tests and make a few changes in your life to prevent getting there. It costs a whole lot more to take care of somebody who has Alzheimer's than it does. Actually, that interview I was recording with Tom O'Brien yesterday, one of the lines I really liked that he said, he's like, people don't get Alzheimer's in their 60s or 70s. People get Alzheimer's in their 20s. It just doesn't show up until their 60s or 70s. Like, it's what you're doing in your 20s and 30s that causes it. And I think it's a really good way to think about it, right? You're developing diseases in your 20s and 30s, or maybe before, but definitely 20s and 30s, you're thinking about it to a slightly higher degree. And then you really get them in your 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Right. Well, I mean, we know that diseases such as cancer, I mean, there's research now saying that it starts developing your body 15 to 20 years before you ever know you have it. And the same thing goes with heart disease. I mean, it's years and years, and then eventually it's full on there, and you can't, it's smacking you in the face, and you can't miss it. But all these things, they don't just happen overnight, and that's one of the biggest things that I try to push to people too. It's like, look, you have to invest in your health now, because a lack of pain does not mean that you're healthy. I mean, that's what most people like. Oh, I'm not in pain, I'm healthy. But I often tell them, it's like, well, let's look at the guy who went to the dentist and found out he had 3 cavities. Like he wasn't necessarily in pain. Look at the guy, ask the guy the day before he had a heart attack.
Right.
Was he in pain? No. And so, like, don't let pain be the determining factor of whether you're healthy or not. That means nothing. That just means absolutely nothing. So
it means it's a little late.
Right. So
yeah.
No, I agree, though. Investing in your health is the way to go. I mean, because it literally is an investment, and I mean, there's no greater investment than you can make than investing in yourself.
It's one of the reasons why I think people have such a hard time with something like meditation. Meditation is one of those few things that when I do it just to do it for no other reason. But it's hard for people to do that. You're right. I think people often need some sort of pain, or they need some sort of goal, or they want to see some sort of benefit out of something they're doing.
Great. We have so many topics. We have so many things we cover. It's just all over. And you're gonna have to be like a regular contributor to the show now. I mean, you're just like, you're in now. And so
I enjoy talking with you. So we need to catch up more often, one way or another.
Well, this pretty much wraps us up for this show. So, Jeremy, once again, thanks for coming on. Appreciate having you on and sharing your wisdom with everybody. And once again, we'll have to have you on again.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate it.
All right, Jeremy. Well, thanks for being part of the show.
Thank you.
If you have not done so yet, you have to get connected with us, and I'll tell you why. Because we deliver so much valuable information that'll teach you how to increase your level of health, how to increase your performance, how to exercise properly, how to eat well, you name it. We just take this healthy lifestyle package and we dive into it and just tell you all the details that you need to know in order to live a healthy lifestyle. So here's how you get connected. Follow us on Facebook at NuVision Excel. And then if you want to be a part of our private Facebook group, which is invite only, you can go to excelpodcast.com and you can request to get entered into this group. In this group, we talk about all the topics I just mentioned, but we dive a little bit deeper, and I show up in there a little bit more and have a lot of presence in there so that I can actually, help people one-on-one in order to help them skyrocket their health. So if you have not done so yet, follow us on Facebook, go to excelpodcast.com and join our private Facebook group. And then lastly, NuVisionExcel.com is loaded with articles. I write about 3 articles a week. I personally write 3 articles a week for NuVisionExcel.com in order to help people skyrocket their health. We put these podcasts on there. We just put tons and tons of information that'll help you take your health to the level that you want it to be at, help you achieve your health goals, and help you ultimately live a better life. So follow us and join us in our group, and I look forward to seeing you there.
If you want more information to multiply your health and simplify your lifestyle, visit our website at excelpodcast.com. Until next time, have an outstanding day.